Hi, I'm Eliza. They called me the family disappointment, told me I wasn't ambitious enough, business-minded enough, worthy enough, then showed me the door after Thanksgiving dinner. 7 years later, my father's company was crumbling. So, I walked into the boardroom he built and said, "Hello, I'm your new CEO." You ever wonder what happens when the one they cast aside becomes the only one who can save them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was always the one who thought differently. Not rebelliously, I could follow the rules just fine. But in a house where my brother's business school accolades lined every shelf, venture capital internships, Young Entrepreneur of the Year, some exclusive investment club membership, I brought home notebooks filled with sustainable business models and ethical company structures that got tossed into recycling bins no one emptied. My name is Eliza Morgan. I was the middle child, and from the moment I could count, I was fascinated by what made businesses work for people, not just profits. Supply chains, fair wages, community impact. While other girls dreamed of corner offices, I sketched circular economies and imagined companies where everyone thrived. My parents called it a naive phase. My brother Theo called me the family charity case. Everyone laughed. I didn't. By the time I was 20, I stopped trying to explain. Myself? I did my part. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, but I kept my real plans quiet. I wasn't interested in hedge funds or cutting costs like Theo. I wanted to build something meaningful, not the flashy kind, the kind that improved lives in places no one talked about. So, I applied for a startup incubator behind their backs. Social enterprise focus. Full funding if I made it. I mailed the application myself on a brisk October morning while Theo blared CNBC in the background. I remember the day they found out. Theo opened my mail, said he thought it was a stock prospectus, and waved the acceptance letter like it was a practical joke. An eco-friendly supply chain incubator? Are you serious? You could have had Dad's investment contacts in your pocket. Instead, you're aiming for hemp tote bags and composting. I looked at my mom. She didn't speak, just pressed her lips together like she'd tasted something sour. My dad exhaled through his nose the way he did when he reviewed disappointing quarterly reports. No one congratulated me. A week later, they invited me to Thanksgiving dinner at our family home, a sprawling colonial in Connecticut, where success was measured in square footage and investment returns. It was supposed to be a celebration of sorts. I'd just completed my business degree with a specialization in sustainable enterprise. I got dressed up. I even wore the silver bracelet my mom gave me for my 16th birthday. I told myself this was it. Maybe they saw me now. Maybe they understood I was doing it my way. The table was long. Relatives I hadn't seen in months were there. Theo wore his usual smug smirk, his custom cufflinks catching every bit of light like they were trying to blind me. I should have noticed the signs, the way nobody made eye contact, the way Dad didn't ask me about my plans. They just asked vague questions. So, what's next? Are you really going to keep chasing this green business fantasy? Then came dessert. A pumpkin pie was set in front of me. It looked beautiful. Perfect crust, whipped cream on top. But I couldn't taste a thing because that's when my father cleared his throat and said, "We've been talking, Eliza." I looked up. Everyone was watching me, not smiling. "You're the family failure," he said. "You always were." The words didn't feel like a slap. They felt worse, like a slow unraveling. Like every business model I'd developed, every late night researching sustainable practices, every hour pitching to potential partners had never existed. My mom didn't speak. She just nodded. Theo chimed in like he was adding a footnote to a business report. "We all agreed. You've made your choices. We're just finally respecting that. You can do your bleeding heart business thing, but don't expect our support." Then he slid an envelope across the table. "A little something to help you start over." It held maybe $500. Cash, no note, no card, just money, like a severance package to someone they'd written off. And then they stood, all of them, like it was a rehearsed exit. No hugs, no goodbye. They left me sitting there with that pie and an envelope that felt more like a termination letter than a gift. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat, my hands flat on the tablecloth, staring at the fork I hadn't touched. A server passed by, hesitated, and asked gently if I was finished with my dessert. I nodded. Outside, the air was bitter. My boots crunched against the frosty lawn as I walked toward nowhere. I didn't have a plan, but I had my purse, and in it, my newly printed business cards and a recycled metal pin that read, "Change the system." It had cost me $12 from an artisan at the local market, but that pin meant everything. It said I had chosen myself. As I crossed the bridge over the neighborhood pond, I could still hear Theo's voice. "You always were." But this time, it didn't echo. It faded. I looked up at the November sky, hands in my coat pockets, clutching that pin like it was a compass. I didn't say a word. I just walked out of that house and out of their story. The cold air outside bit at my skin as I stepped onto the main road. I didn't look back. The clatter of dishes and muffled conversation faded behind me, replaced by the low hum of traffic and the quiet ache sitting heavy in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just kept walking. A few blocks later, I spotted a 24-hour cafe tucked between a bookstore and a thrift shop. Its warm lights glowed like a beacon in the dark. I slid into a booth near the back and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of fair trade coffee. $3.75. I stretched it for 2 hours, letting the steam warm my face as I stirred the liquid more than I drank it. No one texted to ask where I was. My phone stayed silent, screen black on the wooden table. I didn't bother reaching out either. What would I say? That they'd handed me an envelope like a consolation prize and walked out without a second glance? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By midnight, the barista had refilled my cup twice and looked ready to close up. I thanked her softly, left 3 crumpled singles on the table, and slipped back into the night. My car, a used Prius with a dent in the driver's door, was parked just outside my old apartment complex. I had 3 days to vacate. I'd been subleasing from a friend, but the lease was up, and I had nowhere to go. I climbed into the back seat, surrounded by 3 boxes containing everything I owned, and pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders. That night, and many nights after, the car became my temporary office and occasional bedroom. Mornings started, early before parking enforcement could do their rounds. I'd find a local gym where I'd purchase the cheapest membership and shower quickly in the locker room before heading to the public library. I'd brush my hair in the mirror, trying to make it look less like I'd slept in a hybrid. Then I'd change. In a stall, stuff my clothes back into my backpack and walk into the library like nothing was wrong. Every day was a tightrope walk. Smile too much, and someone might think I had time for chit-chat. Look too tired, and someone might ask questions. So I kept my head down, worked on my business plan hard, and made sure my applications for small business grants stayed meticulous and compelling. Still, there were cracks. One afternoon at the entrepreneurial center where I occasionally attended free workshops, Dr. Martinez lingered as I packed up. She was the only one who ever really looked at me, like she was trying to see past the polished elevator pitch and perfect attendance. "You've got something most founders don't," she said, her tone quiet, almost private. "Resilience, even when everything's uncertain around you." I nodded, too stunned to respond. I didn't know if she meant it as praise or an observation, but it stuck with me. That word, resilience, like being unwavering, could be a strength, not a weakness. That night, I parked behind the 24-hour grocery store. The lot was mostly empty, but I liked the way the security lights cast soft shadows across the dashboard. It made the inside of the car feel less like a waiting room. I was bone-tired from pitching to potential partners. My eyes ached. My chest felt hollow. When I leaned my head back against the seat, my vision blurred. But I wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or the tears I'd been holding in for days. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a worn photograph I kept tucked in an old business textbook. It was me and Grandma Rose, taken when I was 12. We were at her small bakery where she'd built a loyal community for over 40 years. In the photo, she's standing beside me, her arm around my shoulders, both of us holding the same handwritten sign that read, "Community first, profit second." "Your ideas will change the world one day," she used to tell me. "Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." She'd passed away before I graduated college. Never saw me start my first company. Never knew they'd call me a failure across a Thanksgiving table like it was an undisputed fact. But I held on to that photo like it was truth. That night, I let myself cry. Not loudly, just quiet tears soaking into my collar. For everything I had lost, for the warmth I missed, for how invisible I had become. A few weeks later, things changed, but not in some dramatic movie-like rescue. It was subtle. I'd submitted a business plan for a small grant competition. Truthfully, I barely remembered the details. Half asleep in the library one night, I'd sent it off. I didn't expect anything. Then one Monday, I got an email. The Innovation Center had selected my plan as a finalist. Not a win yet, but enough to get me into a 3-month incubator program with a stipend. My hands trembled when I read the notification. I didn't ask why they'd chosen me. I didn't want to question it. All I knew was that someone had seen potential in what I was building. That weekend, I moved into a tiny studio apartment provided by the incubator program at the edge of the Innovation District. It was small. One room, a desk, a lamp with an energy-efficient bulb, but it was mine. No boxes, no fogged windows, no waking up to parking tickets on the windshield. I didn't tell anyone. I still worked the same hours, wore the same clothes, kept my head down. But at night, I had a door that locked. I could stretch my legs without bumping into a steering wheel. A few months later, I pitched my concept to the incubator's demo day investors. That day, I stood before a panel that included Vivian Chen, a woman whose voice was as sharp as her business acumen. She didn't waste words, didn't tolerate vague projections. My heart pounded in my chest as I presented my sustainable supply, chain platform, sweat running down my spine. When it was over, she turned to me without looking away from my slides. "You've got an idea I'd invest in," she muttered, almost as if she didn't mean to say it out loud. I didn't smile. I didn't thank her yet. I just stood there, presentation clicker in hand, breathing slow. But something shifted. It was the first time in months I allowed myself to believe maybe I wasn't the failure after all. The hallway outside the pitch room was quiet, and for once, so was my mind. There were still days I didn't recognize my own reflection, especially when I dressed for investor meetings. But in that moment, after hearing those words from a respected venture capitalist, something shifted. It wasn't pride. It was quieter than that, like a window cracking open after years of fog. I didn't linger. I gathered my materials, thanked the panel professionally, and walked toward the exit, ready for the next phase. But as I stepped through the glass doors of the Innovation Center the next morning, my breath caught. Those same glass doors that once towered above me like gates to a life I didn't belong to now opened for me. My visitor badge said Eliza Morgan, founder. Technically true, but I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to claim a title without apology. At the incubator, they knew me as Eliza M. The M stood for Morgan officially, but to me it had become mission, the only purpose I could still carry with dignity. The reflection in the glass paused me just long enough to see it. The hair pulled back neatly. the determination etched between my brows, the passion burning in my eyes despite the exhaustion. A founder, an entrepreneur, alive, but still carrying something heavier than the all-nighters. Inside, the pace picked up quickly. Strategy sessions at 7 a.m., prototype testing, investor calls under fluorescent lights. I moved like a machine, planning, building, calculating, adapting. No one asked where I came from. No one asked where I went at night, and I preferred it that way. By noon, my voice was hoarse from pitch rehearsals. As I helped explain the platform to a potential manufacturing partner, the woman grasped my wrist, gently, and murmured, "You've got a daughter's instinct. Careful, thorough." It hit harder than I expected. I remembered vividly the day I tried to show my mother my first business model for a circular economy marketplace. I was still in college then, nervous, hopeful. She glanced at it and handed it back like I'd shown her a child's drawing. "The real world doesn't work like this, Eliza. This is why we worry about you." That was the same month the family started, distancing themselves. I adjusted my tablet screen and gave the manufacturer a small nod. "The prototype should be ready next week. I'll follow up soon." That was my armor. Professionalism. Nothing more, nothing less. Back in the incubator space, the program director called a brief session for all founders, updates on upcoming demo days, new mentorship opportunities, funding announcements. I sat in the back reviewing code for my platform. That's when I saw it. A press release passed around the room about major industry news. One name jumped out: Morgan Investments. I froze. Morgan. There weren't many Morgans in the Northeast financial sector, at least not with that exact focus. My fingers twitched as I pulled the release closer, and there it was. The announcement. Same angular letterhead, same corporate blue I'd grown up seeing on my father's business cards. Morgan Investments faces liquidity crisis after failed Asian expansion. I closed the document gently, just as the program director said, "Next, we'll welcome a few new mentors joining our advisor network this month. Please give them your attention." When the door opened, I already knew. He walked in, eyes scanning the room. No sign of recognition. His gaze glided right past me. I barely breathed. "Hello," he said, voice thinner than I remembered. "I'm Victor. Chen from Horizons Venture Capital. I've been asked to step in as an advisor while some of the other partners handle restructuring at various firms." I recognized the diplomatic language. Victor had been my father's closest business associate for years. If he was here, distancing himself from various firms, the situation at Morgan Investments was worse than the press release suggested. No one said a word. The director nodded, gestured him to sit. He chose the row ahead of me. I leaned slightly, to the side, just enough to see his profile. His tie, a subtle pattern I remembered from boardroom photos at our house, still knotted perfectly at his throat. We had once attended the same holiday parties. Now he sat unknowingly 2 feet in front of me, serving as a mentor in my professional space, under my domain, and he didn't even know. The rest of the session blurred. I didn't look at him again, but I didn't leave either. Later that afternoon, while coding in the common area, I overheard him during a mentoring session. He was speaking to another founder. "Some of these sustainable business models lack practical scalability. Idealistic types. It's not charity, it's commerce." The founder nodded uncomfortably. Victor went on. "I just hope I don't get assigned to one of the dreamers. You know, the kind that think doing good automatically makes a viable business." I didn't flinch. I simply made another note on my development roadmap and walked to the opposite side of the space. He had no idea he was describing me. That evening, during a brief lull, I stopped by the incubator's resource room. I needed to print investor documents before a morning meeting. The room was mostly empty, the printer humming low like a distant conversation. As I turned the corner, I saw him. He was leaning against the copy machine, holding something. I slowed, my steps staying just beyond the doorframe. There in his hands was a business magazine, open to an article about family business dynasties. Featured prominently was a photo I hadn't seen in years. My father, standing proudly in front of the Morgan Investments headquarters, flanked by my brother and mother. I wasn't in the picture. It must have been taken after I left. He turned the page, scanning the article with a furrowed brow. Then he looked up. His eyes scanned the room slowly, searching. I didn't move, but his gaze swept past the doorway and landed squarely on mine, just for a second. Too long. For the briefest moment, we locked eyes through the narrow gap in the resource room door. His gaze faltered, puzzled, but not quite recognizing me. He looked back at the magazine in his hand, a powerful family now facing financial ruin. Then he closed it, tucked it under his arm, and walked away like it meant nothing. Like they meant nothing. I didn't follow. I had more important things to prepare for. By 6:30 a.m., I was already reviewing code for a complex supply chain tracking system, my first major product ready for launch. The incubator buzzed quietly with the kind of anticipation only early-stage startups carry. My laptop hummed as I walked past glass-walled meeting rooms, coffee cooling in the crook of my elbow. Vivian, my lead investor, met me outside the conference room. She gave me one of her rare, approving nods. Prepared already. Impressive. You've been exceeding expectations nicely this quarter. Thank you, I answered, though part of me tensed. If only she knew just how personal this journey was. We walked toward the meeting room assignment board. I scanned it for my presentation slot, mentally checking off names until I saw it. Victor Chen, Advisor Observation. The name hit like a cold wind. Unexpected, chilling, unwelcome. I stared at it long enough for Vivian to glance over. Everything all right? Just surprised to see that name, I said lightly, as if it didn't twist in my chest. You'll be fine, she said. You've handled tougher critics this month than a traditional VC guy. I didn't reply. I couldn't. In the preparation room, I connected my laptop and adjusted my presentation. The soft hum of the projector was the only sound until the door clicked open. Victor stepped in. He didn't even blink at me, just offered a curt nod and said, "You're the sustainable supply chain platform?" I turned toward him, the face that had once attended my high school graduation. The man who'd once told my father I had interesting but impractical ideas at a family dinner. Yes, I said evenly. I'll be presenting the full system today. He stepped up beside me, reviewing the agenda. Good. I haven't seen many practical implementations in this space yet, but I'm open to being convinced. I didn't correct his assumption that we were strangers. That was his choice. I just nodded once, launched my presentation, and took my place. Inside the room, the air felt thinner than usual. I ran through the platform demonstration as investors were seated, pretending the man at the side of the room hadn't once watched my father dismiss my business school honors as soft achievements because they focused on sustainability metrics. Victor observed a little too intently, a little too critically. At one point, he interrupted with a question about profit margins. I addressed it calmly, firmly. That's the conventional approach. You want to look at our integrated value model. Instead. He blinked. Right. We carried on. His questions were pointed, his focus unwavering, but I never lost my composure. I explained, demonstrated, convinced. When we finally concluded, the investors impressed and the term sheets ready for discussion, Vivian clapped me on the shoulder. Perfect execution in there. You didn't even flinch when the advisor challenged your model. I don't flinch easily, I said. Later that afternoon, I passed through the kitchen area, hoping for 5 quiet minutes and a fresh cup of coffee. I stopped short near the refrigerator when I heard voices, Victor's among them. "That Morgan platform is surprisingly solid," he said to another advisor. "She reminds me of someone I used to know. Same determination, same thoroughness, but with a clarity the other one never had." The other mentor mumbled something in return. I didn't catch it. I just turned, walked back out without grabbing the coffee. The comparison was unexpected, but it still stung. Evening brought more news. On my phone, a notification appeared. A business alert about Morgan Investments. I opened it slowly, almost reluctantly. Morgan Investments seeking buyer amid liquidity crisis. The article detailed how my father's firm had overextended on several speculative ventures, ignoring market signals and doubling down on failing strategies. I set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter. There was no satisfaction in seeing their struggles, just a hollow recognition of what happens when you value the wrong things. I turned back to my code and kept working. Success would be my response, not schadenfreude. The next morning, as I was finalizing investor documents, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. When I did, the voice on the other end was unexpected. "Eliza? It's Theo." 7 years of silence, and now my brother was calling as if we'd spoken last week. I didn't respond immediately, just let the weight of his voice hang in the air. "Are you there?" he asked, voice unusually uncertain. "I'm here," I said simply. There was a pause, the kind that stretches when someone doesn't know how to say what they need to. "I need to talk to you," he finally said. "It's about the family, about Dad's company." I looked out the window of my small office, at the city I'd made my own without their help or approval. "I'm listening," I said. And for the first time in 7 years, he actually started talking to me like I mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat, my hands flat on the tablecloth, staring at the fork I hadn't touched. A server passed by, hesitated, and asked gently if I was finished with my dessert. I nodded. Outside, the air was bitter. My boots crunched against the frosty lawn as I walked toward nowhere. I didn't have a plan, but I had my purse, and in it, my newly printed business cards and a recycled metal pin that read, "Change the system." It had cost me $12 from an artisan at the local market, but that pin meant everything. It said I had chosen myself. As I crossed the bridge over the neighborhood pond, I could still hear Theo's voice. "You always were." But this time, it didn't echo. It faded. I looked up at the November sky, hands in my coat pockets, clutching that pin like it was a compass. I didn't say a word. I just walked out of that house and out of their story. The cold air outside bit at my skin as I stepped onto the main road. I didn't look back. The clatter of dishes and muffled conversation faded behind me, replaced by the low hum of traffic and the quiet ache sitting heavy in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just kept walking. A few blocks later, I spotted a 24-hour cafe tucked between a bookstore and a thrift shop. Its warm lights glowed like a beacon in the dark. I slid into a booth near the back and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of fair trade coffee, $3. $75. I stretched it for 2 hours, letting the steam warm my face as I stirred the liquid more than I drank it. No one texted to ask where I was. My phone stayed silent, screen black on the wooden table. I didn't bother reaching out either. What would I say? That they'd handed me an envelope like a consolation prize and walked out without a second glance. By midnight, the barista had refilled my cup twice and looked ready to close up. I thanked her softly, left 3 crumpled singles on the table, and slipped back into the night. My car, a used Prius with a dent in the driver's door, was parked just outside my old apartment complex. I had 3 days to vacate. I'd been subleasing from a friend, But the lease was up, and I had nowhere to go. I climbed into the back seat, surrounded by 3 boxes containing everything I owned, and pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders. That night, and many nights after, the car became my temporary office and occasional bedroom. Mornings started early before parking enforcement could do their rounds. I'd find a local gym where I'd purchase the cheapest membership and shower. Quickly in the locker room before heading to the public library, I'd brush my hair in the mirror, trying to make it look less like I'd slept in a hybrid. Then I'd change in a stall, stuff my clothes back into my backpack, and walk into the library like nothing was wrong. Every day was a tightrope walk. Smile. Too much, and someone might think I had time for chit-chat. Look too tired, and someone might ask questions. So I kept my head down, worked on my business plan hard, and made sure my applications for small business grants stayed meticulous and compelling. Still, there were cracks. One afternoon at the Entrepreneurial Center where I occasionally attended free workshops, Dr. Martinez lingered as I packed up. She was the only one who ever really looked at me, like she was trying to see past the polished elevator pitch and perfect attendance. "You've got something most founders don't," she said, her tone quiet, almost private. "Resilience, even when everything's uncertain around you." I nodded, too stunned to respond. I didn't know if she meant it as praise or an observation, but it stuck with me. That word, resilience, like being unwavering, could be a strength, not a weakness. That night, I parked behind the 24-hour grocery store. The lot was mostly empty, but I liked the way the security lights cast soft shadows across the dashboard. It made the inside of the car feel less like a waiting room. I was bone tired from pitching to potential partners. My eyes ached. My chest felt hollow. When I leaned my head back against the seat, my vision blurred. But I wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or the tears I'd been holding in for days. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a worn photograph I kept tucked in an old business textbook. It was me and Grandma Rose, taken when I was 12. We were at her small bakery where she'd built a loyal community for over 40 years. In the photo, she's standing beside me, her arm around my shoulders. Both of us holding the same handwritten sign that read, "Community first, profit second." "Your ideas will change the world one day," she used to tell me. "Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." She'd passed away before I graduated college. Never saw me start my first company. Never knew they'd call me a failure across a Thanksgiving table like it was an undisputed fact. But I held on to that photo like it was truth. That night, I let myself cry. Not loudly, just quiet tears soaking into my collar. For everything I had lost, for the warmth I missed, for how invisible I had become. A few weeks later, things changed, but not in some dramatic movie-like rescue. It was subtle. I'd submitted a business plan for a small grant competition. Truthfully, I barely remembered the details. Half asleep in the library one night, I'd sent it off. I didn't expect anything. Then one Monday, I got an email. The Innovation Center had selected my plan as a finalist. Not a win yet, but enough to get me into a 3-month incubator program with a stipend. My hands trembled when I read the notification. I didn't ask why they'd chosen me. I didn't want to question it. All I knew was that someone had seen potential in what I was building. That weekend, I moved into a tiny studio apartment provided by the incubator program at the edge of the Innovation District. It was small. 1 room, a desk, a lamp with an energy-efficient bulb, but it was mine. No boxes, no fogged windows, no waking up to parking tickets on the windshield. I didn't tell anyone. I still worked the same hours, wore the same clothes, kept my head down. But at night, I had a door that locked. I could stretch my legs without bumping into a steering wheel. The incubator wasn't glamorous. It occupied the 3rd floor of an old factory building that had been converted into startup spaces. The windows were drafty, the Wi-Fi spotty in certain corners, but it buzzed with a different kind of energy than my father's sleek investment firm. Here, people built things with purpose. My days quickly fell into a new rhythm. I'd arrive by 7 a.m., claim the same desk by the east window, and work until the security guard gently reminded me it was past midnight. My sustainable supply chain platform was taking shape, a system that would track ethical sourcing from raw materials to finished products, verifying fair labor practices and environmental standards along the way. Most nights I ate ramen noodles cooked in the communal kitchen, saving every penny of my stipend for cloud server costs and API access. The other founders called me the Ghost, there when they arrived, still there when they left, silent, but somehow present. I didn't mind the nickname. Ghosts were invisible but powerful in their own way. On the 45th day, I hit a wall. The algorithm I'd been coding to track material origins kept failing when scaled beyond local suppliers. I'd been awake for nearly 30 hours, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer determination. As morning light streamed through the windows, I let my head drop onto my keyboard, too exhausted to cry, too stubborn to quit. "You look like you could use this," a voice said, setting down a proper cup of coffee beside my laptop. Maya, the UX designer from the solar energy startup across the hall. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her in the 6 weeks we'd been there. I lifted my head, probably leaving keyboard imprints on my forehead. "Thanks," I managed, voice rough from disuse. She didn't walk away like I expected. Instead, she pulled up a chair and glanced at my screen. "Supply chain verification? Scaling issues?" I nodded, too tired to be territorial about my code. "I faced something similar with our energy tracking system," she said, pulling her chair closer. "Mind if I take a look?" For the next 3 hours, we picked apart my algorithm, restructured the architecture, and rebuilt the verification pathway. By noon, the system was processing regional data smoothly. Maya never asked why this mattered so much to me. She just helped, then went back to her desk with a simple, "Everyone needs a hand sometimes." That evening I bought her dinner, actual food from the Thai place down the street, not ramen. We sat cross-legged on the floor of the incubator kitchen, eating from takeout containers, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest lighten slightly. "So," she said between bites, "what's your story? Most people don't pour their entire existence into ethical supply chains without a reason." I hesitated, chopsticks mid-air. I'd gotten so used to keeping everything locked inside that speaking felt dangerous, but something about the fluorescent kitchen lights at 9 p.m. and the smell of pad thai broke through my defenses. "My family built their fortune-cutting corners," I said finally. "Labor exploitation, environmental shortcuts, the works. When I tried to change things from the inside, they showed me the door." Maya nodded, not with pity, but with recognition. "Mine made their money in fast fashion. Sweatshops, child labor, the whole ugly package. I designed solar systems now partially, to spite them." We laughed, a small broken sound that somehow felt like healing. After that night, I wasn't quite so alone. Maya introduced me to her network, other founders who valued impact alongside profit. We traded skills, shared resources, propped each other up when investors dismissed our idealistic visions. We became a kind of family, not bound by blood, but by shared purpose. The day I won my first major grant, $50,000 for prototype development, I didn't call my parents. I celebrated with Maya and our growing circle, drinking cheap champagne from coffee mugs on the roof of the incubator building. Under the stars, watching the city lights, I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. "To Eliza," Maya toasted, raising her mug, "who's going to prove that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive?" I smiled, a real one that reached my eyes. "To all of us," I amended. the so-called failures who were changing the game. With the grant money, I hired my first 2 employees, a developer who shared my vision and a supply chain specialist who'd spent years in the trenches of global manufacturing. We worked out of a slightly larger space in the same building, our desks crowded together, our ambitions expanding beyond the walls. The platform evolved from concept to beta, from dream to reality. We onboarded our first clients, small manufacturers willing to take a chance on transparency. Each success was small but significant, a validation that my path, though harder, was right. A year after that Thanksgiving night, I received an invitation to speak at a sustainable business conference. Not as a struggling founder, but as an emerging voice in ethical supply chain management. I stepped onto that stage wearing a second-hand blazer I'd carefully steamed the night before. My shoes were scuffed but polished, my presentation meticulously prepared. The future of business isn't just about profit margins, I told the audience, my voice steadier than I felt. It's about creating systems where everyone thrives. Workers, communities, ecosystems, and yes, shareholders too. From the back of the room, I spotted a familiar face. Victor Chen, my father's longtime business associate, watching with narrowed eyes. My heart stuttered, but I didn't falter. I finished my presentation to enthusiastic applause, answered questions with confidence I was still learning to feel, and stepped off the stage with my head high. Later, as I gathered my materials, Victor approached. He didn't recognize me at first. It had been just over a year, but struggle and purpose had reshaped me in ways I couldn't see. Interesting concepts, he said, extending his hand, though perhaps overly optimistic about human nature. I shook his hand firmly. Not optimistic, determined. He tilted his head, studying me. Have we met before? You seem familiar. I doubt it, I replied evenly. I move in different circles than Morgan Investments. His eyes widened slightly at the name drop. You know the Morgans? I know of them, I said, shouldering my bag. If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to get to. I walked away before he could place me, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my steps never faltering. It was the first test, and I'd passed it. I could stand on my own merit now, not as Eliza Morgan, disappointment, but as Eliza M., founder and visionary. The next 2 years passed in a blur of growth and challenges. We secured a proper funding round, moved to a real office, expanded our team to 15 people. The platform gained traction, not just with small manufacturers, but with mid-sized companies looking to verify their ethical claims. We weren't profitable yet, but we were making waves. During this time, I occasionally spotted Morgan Investments in the business news. They were expanding aggressively into Asian markets, making splashy acquisitions, doubling down on traditional profit-driven models while sustainability became more than a buzzword. I didn't follow closely. I was too busy building something different. Then came the pivot point. An international conglomerate approached us, not to invest, but to implement our platform across their vast supply network. It would be our biggest client by far, a game-changing contract. The catch? They wanted me to present directly to their board in Singapore. I hadn't left the country since starting the company. The cost of the trip alone would strain our runway. But this was the opportunity we'd been working toward, a chance to transform a global supply chain from the inside out. The night before my decision was due, I sat on the floor of my apartment, still small, but now by choice rather than necessity. The walls were covered in whiteboard paint filled with flowcharts and projections. I'd come so far from that night, in my car, but the fear of falling still lingered. My phone rang. Maya, now my official co-founder and unofficial voice of reason. "You're overthinking this," she said without preamble. "You've been preparing for this moment since before I met you." "It's a huge risk," I countered. "If it falls through." "And if it doesn't?" she interrupted. Eliza, you started this company because you believed business could be better. Here's your chance to prove it on a global scale. After we hung up, I stared at the photo of Grandma Rose still tucked into my desk frame. Your ideas will change the world one day, she'd said. Maybe this was that day. I booked the flight. Singapore was a world away from Connecticut, modern, efficient, vibrant. The conglomerate's headquarters occupied 50 floors of a gleaming tower in the financial district. As I rode the elevator to the boardroom, I thought about how my father would have given anything for this meeting, but for entirely different reasons. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived at 8:30, partly from jet lag, partly from nerves. The receptionist directed me to a waiting area with a view of the city that made me dizzy. I reviewed my slides one last time, adjusted my blazer, new this time, bought specifically for this meeting, and centered myself. At 9:45, the doors opened. The board members filed in, serious faces and power suits. I stood, ready to introduce myself, when the last person entered the room. My father. I froze, the tablet in my hands suddenly heavy. He didn't notice me at first, deep in conversation with the chairman. When he looked up, his expression shifted from distracted to confused to shocked in the span of seconds. Eliza? The name fell from his lips like a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Mr. Morgan, I replied, my voice somehow steady. I wasn't aware you were involved with Transglobal. The chairman glanced between us. You two know each other? My father recovered quickly, smoothing his expression into professional neutrality. Ms. Morgan is my daughter, though I wasn't aware she would be our presenter today. Former daughter, technically, I corrected with a small smile. Since you made it clear I wasn't part of the family anymore. The room went silent. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The chairman cleared his throat. Perhaps we should reschedule. That won't be necessary, I said, stepping forward. My personal history with Mr. Morgan has no bearing on what I'm here to present, unless, of course, he feels unable to evaluate our platform objectively. I looked directly at my father, a challenge in my gaze. His jaw tightened, but he nodded once. By all means, proceed. For the next hour, I presented as if he weren't there. I explained our ethical supply chain verification system, demonstrated its functionality, outlined the implementation plan. I answered questions thoroughly, professionally, never once letting my voice waver when my father raised points designed to undermine my credibility. When I finished, the chairman looked impressed. This is exactly what we've been searching for. Your approach to transparency is comprehensive without being cumbersome. My father's face remained impassive, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He'd taught me enough about business to recognize when someone was reassessing their position. After the board voted unanimously to move forward with the contract, the chairman invited me to a celebratory lunch. Mr. Morgan, you'll join us course? It's not every day we get to dine with a father-daughter business success story. Before my father could respond, I said, I'm afraid Mr. Morgan and I have some catching up to do first. Perhaps we could join you afterward. The chairman nodded, seemingly pleased at the prospect of family reconciliation. When the room emptied, my father and I stood facing each other across the polished table, 7 years of silence stretching between us. You've done well for yourself, he said finally, his tone careful, measuring. No thanks to you, I replied. Not angry, just stating fact. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, grayer now than when I'd left. I underestimated you. We all did. Yes, I agreed. You did. A long pause followed. I could see him struggling to find the right words, something that had never been difficult for Richard Morgan, master negotiator. Why are you really here? Dad? I asked, cutting through the silence. Transglobal isn't your usual type of client. His expression shifted, the mask of corporate confidence slipping. For the first time, I saw something I'd never associated with my father: vulnerability. Morgan Investments is in trouble, he admitted. Our Asian expansion was miscalculated. We've been looking for strategic partnerships to stabilize. Understanding dawned. And Transglobal is your white knight. He nodded. Or was supposed to be, until my estranged daughter walked in with exactly what they've been searching for. I let that sink in. The irony was almost too perfect. The sustainable, ethical approach he'd dismissed as naive idealism was now the very thing his potential savior valued. Life has a sense of humor, doesn't it? I said, allowing myself a small smile. He didn't smile back. Eliza, I know I have no right to ask, but you want me to help you, I finished for him. Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement, he said, slipping back into business mode. Your platform gets access to our global network. We get a chance to modernize our approach. I studied him, this man who had shaped so much of my life, for better and worse. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering a deal. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. I'll think about it, I said, gathering my materials. But not because of our shared last name. Because it might actually make business sense. As I walked toward the door, he called after me. You're nothing like I expected you to become. I paused, hand on the doorknob. That was always the problem, wasn't it? You never saw who I actually was. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the Singapore skyline, I called Maya. I told her about the contract, about my father, about the unexpected collision of my past and future. What are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I looked out at the city lights, so far from that cold Thanksgiving night. I'm going to build something better than he ever could, and I'm going to let him watch me do it. The next morning, I met my father for breakfast. He looked like he hadn't slept, the weight of Morgan Investments' precarious position visible in the shadows under his eyes. I've thought about your proposal, I said after we ordered. I'm prepared to bring Morgan Investments into our client network, but on one condition. He leaned forward. Name it. You step down as CEO. Yeah, recoiled as if I'd slapped him. That's my company. I built it from nothing. And now you're about to lose it, I countered calmly. I'm offering you a way to save it, to transform it into something sustainable, both financially and ethically. By forcing me out? That's your revenge? I shook my head. This isn't about revenge, Dad. It's about the future. Your methods are outdated. Your reputation is tarnished. The company needs new leadership to survive. And I suppose you think you should be that leader, he said, voice tight with barely controlled anger. Actually, no, I replied. I have my own company to run, but I know someone who could navigate the transition effectively while implementing our platform throughout your operations. His eyes narrowed. Who? Maya Chen, my co-founder and the sharpest strategic mind I know. She comes from a family very much like ours, but chose a different path. She understands both worlds. He was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options, which were increasingly limited. Morgan Investments was bleeding clients, hemorrhaging, value, pride against survival. Finally, he nodded, once, decisive. I'll take your deal, but I want to remain as chairman of the board. Emeritus, I countered. Advisory only. Another long pause. Agreed. We spent the rest of breakfast hammering out details, integration timelines, leadership transition, board restructuring. It was the longest civil conversation we'd had in nearly a decade, focused entirely on business because that was the only language we both still shared. As we parted ways in the hotel lobby, he hesitated, then asked, Was it worth it? Walking, away from everything we could have given you to build this on your own. I thought about the nights in my car, the ramen dinners, the constant struggle. Then I thought about the team that believed in my vision, the clients whose practices were genuinely improving, the purpose that drove me forward each day. Yes, I said simply. It was worth every second. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of the former Morgan Investments headquarters. The building was the same, all glass and steel and imposing height, but the logo had changed. Now it read Morgan Ethical Ventures, with a stylized green leaf incorporated into the design. Maya had taken over as CEO 6 weeks earlier. Already, the culture was shifting. Employees who had been afraid to speak up were contributing ideas. Clients who had been considering jumping ship were cautiously returning. The stock, which had plummeted to nearly worthless, was showing signs of recovery. I was there for the official relaunch ceremony. As a key partner, not as a Morgan. I'd kept my company separate, integrated, but independent. It was better that way. The elevator doors opened, and my father emerged. He looked different, less imposing somehow, though still impeccably dressed. The role of chairman emeritus suited him better than I'd expected. Without the pressure of day-to-day operations, he'd become something of a sustainability convert, using his extensive network to open doors that might have remained closed to us. Eliza, he greeted me with a nod. The press is assembled in the conference room. Maya suggested you might want to say a few words. I'm not here for publicity, I reminded him. Just support. He hesitated, then said, It would mean something, coming from you. I studied him, trying to see past the business facade to whatever might be genuine underneath. Why? Because you were right, he said quietly. About all of it. The direction of the industry, the importance of ethics, the future. A pause. About being a failure in my eyes. That was my failure, not yours. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Richard Morgan, it was seismic. In the Maya conference room, cameras flashed as Maya unveiled the new company direction. She spoke confidently about ethical supply chains, responsible investment, long-term thinking. The assembled press took notes, some skeptical, some intrigued by the dramatic pivot of a traditionally cutthroat firm. When she invited me to the podium, I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there, looking out at the room full of business reporters who had once covered my father's aggressive acquisition strategies, I found words forming. 7 years ago, I sat at a Thanksgiving table where I was told I was a failure for believing business could be a force for good, I began. Today, I stand in the headquarters of a company being transformed by that very belief. My eyes found my father's in the crowd. He didn't look away. This isn't a story about vindication, I continued. It's about evolution. About recognizing that the old ways of doing business, exploitative, extractive, short-sighted, are not just morally wrong but increasingly unprofitable. The future belongs to companies that create value for everyone in their ecosystem, not just shareholders. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, my father approached with something in his hand. A small box, wrapped simply. "What's this?" I asked, wary of gifts from a man who had once given me $500 to disappear. "Something that belongs to you," he said, extending it. Inside was a key, old-fashioned brass, clearly symbolic rather than functional. "The original key to the first Morgan office," he explained. "My father gave it to me when I took over. I'm a bit late in passing it on, but it seems appropriate now." I held it, feeling the weight of both legacy and possibility. "I'm not taking over Morgan Ventures," I reminded him. "Maya is." "I know," he nodded, "but you're the one who saved it, who transformed it. That makes you more of a Morgan than I ever was." I closed my fingers around the key, not quite ready to forgive, but perhaps ready to move forward. "I'll keep it," I said. "As a reminder." "Of what?" I smiled, small but genuine. That sometimes the greatest success comes from being counted as a failure by people who couldn't see the future. As I walked out of the building that afternoon, key in my pocket, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won some victory over my father, but because I'd stayed true to my vision when it would have been easier to conform. I'd built something meaningful out of rejection. I thought about that cold Thanksgiving night, about the long road from there to here, about sleeping in my car and eating ramen and doubting myself in the darkest hours, about finding my people, my purpose, my power. The journey hadn't been easy. It hadn't been quick. But standing in the autumn sunshine, watching the new Morgan Ethical Ventures logo gleam against the skyline, I knew with absolute certainty it had been worth it. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own vision? Tell me in the comments below. 3 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, my company EthiChain had grown from a one-woman operation into a recognized innovator in the ethical supply chain space. We had 28 employees, offices in 2 cities, and a client list that included several mid-sized manufacturers committed to transparency. I'd moved from that tiny incubator studio to a modest apartment with actual bedroom walls and windows that didn't rattle when trucks passed by. Success is a funny thing. It doesn't arrive with trumpets and confetti. It creeps in quietly, building so gradually you barely notice until one day you realize you haven't checked your bank account balance with dread in months, until you can buy coffee without calculating how many meals it equals, until the weight on your chest lightens enough that you sometimes forget it was ever there. That Tuesday morning began like any other. I arrived at the office by 6:30 a.m., beating even Maya, who typically rolled in around 7. I liked these quiet moments before the energy of the day took over, when the office was still and I could hear myself think. I was reviewing the latest iteration of our blockchain verification system when my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Need to talk. It's about Dad. Theo. I stared at those 7 words for a long time. 7 years of silence, and now 7 words asking for my attention. I set the phone down and turned back to my screen, determined to ignore it. Whatever crisis Theo was facing, it wasn't mine to solve. I'd built this life deliberately apart from them. But curiosity is a persistent thing. By noon, after the 3rd text, "It's urgent. Please call." I stepped into my office and closed the door. I didn't call. I texted back a single word. Why? His response came immediately. "Dad's in the hospital. Heart attack. Morgan Investments is crumbling. Need your help." Of course. They didn't need me. They needed what I'd built. I considered not responding at all, but something made me type. What hospital? Boston Memorial. Room 742. I didn't reply further. I didn't promise to come. I simply returned to my work, pushing the information to the back of my mind. There were proposals to review, code to troubleshoot, employees to mentor. The afternoon ticked by in a productive blur. At 5:30 p.m., as the office began to empty, Maya appeared in my doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had made her such an effective co-founder. "Something's up," she said. Not a question. I looked up from my laptop. "My father had a heart attack." Her eyebrows rose. "The father who called you a failure and kicked you out." "The same." "And you're sitting here because—" I shrugged, aiming for nonchalance but landing somewhere closer to defensive. "Because I have work to do. Because his medical emergency doesn't change anything." Maya pushed off from the doorframe and dropped into the chair across from me. "Except clearly it does. Or you wouldn't look like you're trying to set your keyboard on fire with your eyes." I sighed, leaning back. "My brother texted. Apparently, Morgan Investments is in trouble." "Ah," she nodded. "So they want something." "They always want something." Are you going to see him? I turned to the window, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as dusk settled. I don't know. Maya was quiet for a moment, then said, You know, my grandmother had this saying, hold grudges in open palms, not closed fists. Meaning? Meaning carrying anger is a choice. You can acknowledge it without letting it control your decisions. She stood. Whatever you decide, I've got your back. After she left, I sat in the growing darkness of my office, thoughts churning. I pulled up the Morgan Investments website, something I hadn't done in years. The sleek interface boasted of tradition, legacy, and proven methods, all code for resistance to change. But beneath the marketing gloss, the numbers told a different story. Their stock had dropped 43% in 6 months. 3 board members had resigned. Industry blogs were speculating about a hostile takeover. I switched to news feeds. The story was becoming clearer. Morgan Investments had doubled down on fossil fuel financing just as major institutional investors were divesting. They'd expanded aggressively into Asian markets without understanding local sustainability regulations. They'd dismissed environmental concerns as passing trends while their competitors adapted. They were drowning in the very future I had predicted, the future my father had mocked me for believing in. I shut my laptop, gathered my things, and headed out. But instead of going home, I found myself driving toward Boston Memorial Hospital. The hospital corridors were quiet at that hour, visiting time nearly over. I followed the signs to the cardiac care unit, each step measured and deliberate. Outside room 742, I paused, listening to the murmur of voices inside. I recognized Theo's. Immediately, still carrying that hint of superiority even when subdued. My mother's softer tones. Another voice I didn't know, probably a doctor. I didn't knock. I simply pushed the door open and stepped inside. The conversation stopped abruptly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, Theo's widening in surprise, my mother's narrowing in confusion, and a white-coated doctor's remaining professionally neutral. In the center of it all, my father lay against white pillows, looking smaller than I remembered. His face was ashen, dark circles shadowing his eyes. Monitors beeped steadily beside him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father's hoarse voice broke the silence. Eliza? I nodded once, keeping my expression carefully composed. I heard you were here. Theo stepped forward, relief visible in his face. You came. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure why I did, I replied honestly. The doctor, sensing family tension, excused himself with a promise to return later. My mother remained frozen by the window, as if uncertain whether to approach or retreat. My father struggled to sit up straighter. You look different. It's been 7 years, I said. Things change. Some things, he conceded, then gestured weakly to the chair beside his bed. Will you sit? I hesitated, then took the seat, maintaining a careful distance. Up close, the toll of his condition was more evident. The pallor of his skin, the slight tremor in his hands. Despite everything, something twisted in my chest at seeing him so diminished. Theo says you've built quite a company, he said, his voice strained but clear. I have. Ethical supply chains, sustainability verification. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The very things I said would never work. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I asked, what happened to Morgan Investments? His expression darkened. The market shifted. Investors want environmental credentials now, transparency, all the things He trailed off. All the things you dismissed, I finished for him. He nodded, a small concession. We're facing a liquidity crisis. The board is considering a fire sale of assets. And you thought I might help because... Theo jumped in, ever the dealmaker. Your platform is exactly what we need to demonstrate a commitment to change, to show investors we're evolving. I turned to him, eyebrow raised. So you want to use my success to save the company that threw me out? That's quite a proposition. My mother finally spoke, her voice tight. We're still family, Eliza. Are we? I asked quietly, because I remember being very clearly told otherwise. My father's monitor beeped a little faster. He raised a hand, silencing further discussion. You have every right to walk out that door and never look back, he said, surprising me with his directness. But before you do, I'd like you to meet someone. He pressed the call button. Moments later, a young woman in business attire entered, tablet in hand. She couldn't have been more than 25, with determined eyes behind stylish glasses. This is Jessica Chen, my father said, our new sustainability coordinator, one of the few changes the board approved before my, episode. Jessica stepped forward, recognition dawning on her face. You're Eliza Morgan? Of EthiChain? Your keynote at the Sustainable Business Forum last year was incredible. I nodded, caught off guard by the genuine admiration in her voice. Jessica has been trying to implement changes, my father continued. But she's met resistance at every level. Show her, Jessica. The young woman opened her tablet and pulled up a presentation. This is my proposal for transforming Morgan Investments, she explained, handing it to me. I've been pushing for it for months, but without senior-level support. I scrolled through the slides, a strange feeling growing in my chest. The proposal outlined a complete restructuring around sustainable investment principles, ethical, governance, transparency metrics, all concepts I'd championed years ago at that same Thanksgiving table. All ideas my father had dismissed as naive idealism. It's solid work, I said, returning the tablet. But why show me this? My father exchanged a look with Theo, then said, because the board might listen to you, as an outside expert, as someone with credibility in this space. I laughed, the sound sharp in the sterile room. You want me to convince your board to implement the very ideas you rejected from me? Yes, he said simply, because you were right, and I was wrong. The words hung in the air between us, unexpected and unadorned. No qualifications, no business speak to soften the admission. Just a plain acknowledgement I never thought I'd hear. Dad, Theo cautioned. The doctors said to avoid stress. My father waved him off impatiently. I'm having this conversation, he insisted, then turned back to me. Eliza, I made a terrible mistake. Not just about the business direction, but about you, about your vision. I stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. I should go. Please, he said, and something in his voice, a vulnerability I'd never heard before, made me pause. Just look at the company files, see what can be salvaged. Not for me, but for the people who work there. For Jessica and others like her, trying to change things from within. I glanced at Jessica, who was watching our exchange with a mixture of confusion and hope. I recognized that look, the determination of someone fighting for change against institutional resistance. It was the same expression I'd worn 7 years ago. I'll review the files, I said finally. That's all I'm promising. Relief washed over my father's face. That's all I'm asking. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Eliza, thank you for coming. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak, and walked out. The next morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. The financial data Theo had sent over painted a grim picture. Morgan Investments was months away from insolvency. Their traditional client base was eroding as younger investors demanded ethical options. Their reputation in the industry had shifted from stalwart to dinosaur in less than 2 years. Maya found me surrounded by spreadsheets and market analyses. When she arrived, she took one look at the chaos on my desk and said, So you went to the hospital. I did. And now you're considering helping them. I rubbed my eyes, tired from a night of little sleep. I'm considering helping Jessica Chen, their sustainability coordinator, and the employees who didn't choose the company's direction but will suffer from its collapse. Maya nodded, understanding immediately. A targeted rescue, not a blanket. Bailout. Exactly. She pulled up a chair. So what's the play? I turned my laptop to show her a rough flowchart I'd been developing since dawn. Integration, not acquisition, not partnership. Complete integration. She studied the diagram, eyes widening slightly. You want to absorb Morgan Investments into EthiChain? That's ambitious. Not all of it, I clarified. Just the salvageable parts. The client relationships, the global infrastructure, some of the talent. We'd shed the problematic investments, rebrand the remains, implement our platform across their operations. And your father? Theo? The old guard? I leaned back, considering. Advisory roles at most. No operational control. Maya whistled low. That's going to be a tough sell. They're not in a position to negotiate, I pointed out. And neither am I, in some ways. We've been looking to expand globally. This gets us there 5 years faster than organic growth. She studied me for a long moment. Is this about business or closure? Can't it be both? She smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips. Just be careful which one's driving the decisions. By noon, I had a framework for what I was tentatively calling Project Phoenix. I sent Theo a message requesting a formal meeting with the Morgan Investments Board the following day, contingent on my father being well enough to attend via video conference. His response was immediate. Anything you need. Boardroom reserved. For 10 a.m. I spent the rest of the day building out the proposal with Maya and our executive team. We worked late into the evening, ordering dinner to the conference room, weighing options, calculating risks. By midnight, we had a comprehensive plan, bold, ambitious, but grounded in sound business logic. This could be revolutionary, our CFO commented as we wrapped up. A case study in ethical business transformation. I nodded, satisfied with our work but aware of the personal complexities lurking beneath the business strategy. Let's get some rest. Tomorrow will be interesting. The Morgan Investments headquarters looked exactly as I remembered. Imposing, traditional, a monument to old-school finance. The security guard checked my ID, did a double take at the name, but waved me through without comment. In the elevator, I straightened my blazer and centered myself. The boardroom was full when I arrived. Executives in expensive suits, board members with skeptical expressions, Theo standing nervously by the door. A large screen on the wall showed my father in his hospital room, propped up against pillows but dressed in a button-down shirt, maintaining appearances even from a hospital bed. Eliza, Theo greeted me, relief evident in his voice. Thank you for coming. I nodded, setting up my laptop at the head of the table, a position of authority I deliberately claimed. Jessica Chen sat to one side, notebook ready, looking both hopeful and apprehensive. Gentlemen, ladies, I began without preamble. I've reviewed your financial situation, market position, and operational structure. The diagnosis isn't good. Murmurs rippled around the table. I continued, my voice steady and professional. Morgan Investments is facing extinction. Not just financial difficulties, cultural irrelevance. The market has evolved while you've remained static. Your competitors have embraced sustainability and transparency while you've clung to outdated models. One board member, a silver-haired man with a pinched expression, interrupted. We've been in business for 40 years. We've weathered downturns before. This isn't a downturn, I countered. It's a paradigm shift, and you've been on the wrong side of it. I advanced to the first slide of my presentation. a stark graph showing their declining valuation against rising client demand for ethical investment options. Your clients aren't just looking elsewhere because of returns. They're leaving because your values no longer align with theirs, because you've failed to adapt to a market that increasingly prioritizes environmental and social impact alongside financial performance. The room grew tense. On the screen, my father watched intently, his expression unreadable. "So you're here to gloat?" another executive asked, voice tight with defensiveness. "I'm here to offer a solution," I replied, advancing to the next slide. "But it won't be comfortable, and it won't preserve the status quo." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined Project Phoenix in detail, the integration of Morgan investments, salvageable assets into EthiChain's operational structure, the implementation of our ethical supply chain platform across their global network, the rebranding and repositioning to emphasize transparency and sustainability. This isn't a merger, I clarified. This is a transformation. Morgan Investments as it exists today will end. What emerges will be part of something new, something better aligned with where the market is heading. The room erupted in objections. Board members talking over each other, executives protesting the loss of autonomy, questions about leadership and control flying from all directions. I let the chaos continue for precisely 1 minute, then raised my hand. The room gradually quieted. "I understand your concerns," I said calmly. "But consider the alternative. In 6 months, Morgan Investments will likely be insolvent. In 12, it will exist only in business school case studies about failure to adapt. This plan offers a future. Different, yes, but viable." From the screen, my father's voice cut through the tension. "She's right." All heads turned toward him. He looked tired but resolute. "I founded this company believing that financial success was the only metric that mattered," he continued. "I was wrong. The world has changed. If we don't change with it, we die." He paused, then added, "Eliza saw this coming years ago. We should have listened then. We need to listen now." The admission silenced the room. Theo looked stunned. The board members exchanged glances, reassessing the situation, in light of the founder's endorsement. "There are conditions," I said into the quiet. "The leadership structure will change. The problematic investments will be divested. The corporate culture will transform. And—" I looked directly at my father on the screen. "The Morgan name will be retired." A collective intake of breath around the table. The Morgan name was sacrosanct, the cornerstone of their identity and market presence. "Absolutely not," the silver-haired board member declared. "The Morgan name has equity, recognition—" "The Morgan name has baggage," I interrupted. "Associations with outdated practices, resistance to change, ethical blind spots. In the market we're entering, it's a liability, not an asset." Theo stood. "Eliza, be reasonable. The name is our heritage." "Heritage can become a prison," I said, not unkindly. "I'm offering a future, not a memorial to the past." On the screen, my father was quiet, processing. Finally, he said, "What would the new entity be called?" "EthiChain Global," I replied, "with a division called Phoenix Ventures that would house the restructured investment operations." More discussion erupted, board members huddling in small groups, executives whispering urgently. I remained standing at the head of the table, unmoved. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a lifeline, offered on my terms. After nearly an hour of debate, questions, and reluctant acknowledgments of their precarious position, the energy in the room shifted. The resistance wasn't gone, but it was weakening in the face of financial reality. "We'll need time to consider this proposal," the board chair finally said. "It's significant." "You have 24 hours, I replied, gathering my materials. "The market won't wait, and neither will I." As the meeting dispersed, Theo caught up with me in the hallway. That was impressive, he admitted. Ruthless, but impressive. I learned from watching Dad all those years, I said. The difference is, I'm using those skills to build something better, not just bigger. He studied me, seeing me clearly perhaps for the first time. You really believe in all this, don't you? The ethical business model, the transparency, the sustainability. It's not just marketing for you. It never was, I replied. That's what none of you understood. Before I could leave, Jessica Chen approached, excitement barely contained behind professional composure. Ms. Morgan, your proposal, it's everything I've been trying to push for, but with the leverage to actually make it happen. I smiled at her enthusiasm. If this goes through, I'll need allies on the inside, people who already understand the vision. Her eyes widened at the implicit offer. I'd be honored to help with the transition. Good, because it won't be easy. There will be resistance every step of the way. She nodded, determination replacing excitement. I'm ready for that. I've been fighting uphill battles here for 2 years. I recognized in her the same fire that had driven me, the belief that business could be better, could do better. Send me your resume, I said, and a list of others in the company who share your perspective. We'll need a core team of change agents. As I reached the elevator, my phone rang. My father's name on the screen surprised me. He must have gotten my number from Theo. You're not negotiating, he said when I answered, his voice tired but clear. You're dictating terms. Yes, I agreed, because I'm operating from a position of strength, and you're not. A long pause, then a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It took me a moment to realize he was laughing, a soft, rueful chuckle. You really are my daughter, he said, though a better version than I could have shaped. I didn't know how to respond to that. After a moment, he continued, The board will agree to your terms. I'll make sure of it. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. This effectively ends Morgan. Investments as you built it, as you defined yourself by it. Another pause. Because some legacies are worth preserving, and others need to evolve. Because I'd rather see the company transform under your vision than die clinging to mine. His voice softened. And because I owe you this, for not seeing what you saw, for not believing in you when I should have. The elevator arrived, doors sliding open with a soft chime. I need to go, I said, not ready to process the emotions. His words stirred. Eliza, he said quickly before I could hang up, when this is done, when I'm out of here, could we talk? Not about business, just talk. I stepped into the elevator, watching the doors close on the world my father had built, the world that had rejected me and was now seeking my salvation. We'll see, I said, and ended the call. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights. Maya had texted updates throughout the day. The board was deliberating. Theo was lobbying key members. Our team was preparing for various scenarios. Everything was in motion, teetering on the edge of something momentous. I thought about the long road from that Thanksgiving night to this moment. About sleeping in my car and showering at the gym. About pitching to investors who patronized me. About building something from nothing but conviction and grit. I thought about my father in that hospital bed, humbled by circumstance and facing the end of the empire he'd built. About Theo, caught between loyalty to the old ways and recognition of the new reality. About Jessica Chen, fighting for change from within a resistant system. I thought about power, how it shifts, how it transforms, how sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain perspective. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. Board vote tomorrow 9 a.m. Looks promising. Dad asking if you'll be there. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pulled out the recycled metal pin I still kept in my desk drawer, changed the system. and ran my thumb over its weathered surface. It had been my talisman during the darkest days, a reminder of purpose, when everything else was uncertain. Finally, I texted back, "I'll be there, but not as a Morgan, as the CEO of EthiChain." His response came quickly. "Understood." And after, I knew what he was asking. After the business was settled, after the papers were signed, after the transformation began, what then? Would there be reconciliation? Forgiveness? A rebuilding of bridges long burned? I looked out at the city again, at the future I'd built for myself despite them, because of them, beyond them, at the vision I'd held on to when everything else was taken away. "One step at a time," I replied. "First, we build something worth believing in." I set the phone down and closed my eyes, feeling the cool night air on my face. Tomorrow would bring challenges, negotiations, the beginning of a complex integration that would test everything I'd learned. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of recognition. Not celebration, not vindication, but simple acknowledgement. The girl they'd called a failure was about to transform the company that had cast her out. Not for revenge, not for validation, but because her vision had been right all along. And sometimes being right is the best response to being wronged. The board meeting that would decide Morgan Investments' fate was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. I arrived at 8:15, wanting time to center myself before the storm. The receptionist recognized me immediately this time, eyes widening slightly before she composed her expression into professional neutrality. "Ms. Morgan," she greeted me. "They're expecting you in the main boardroom." I nodded my thanks, noting how strange it felt to be welcomed into a space that had once been forbidden to me. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me a moment to reflect on the symmetry of it all. 7 years ago, I'd been told I had no place in this world. Now I was here to reshape it entirely. The boardroom was empty when I arrived, the long mahogany table gleaming under recessed lighting. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston's financial district stretched in steel and glass splendor, the morning sun catching on buildings that housed investment firms still clinging to outdated models. Soon, this view would belong to a different kind of company. I set up my presentation materials methodically, arranging everything with the precise attention to detail that had become my trademark. My hands were steady, my breathing even. I had moved beyond nervousness years ago. Necessity had burned it out of me during those months of pitching to investors while living in my car. The door opened, and Theo entered first, followed by board members in various states of resignation and skepticism. Jessica Chen slipped in quietly, positioning herself near the back wall, notepad ready. The large screen on the far wall flickered to life, showing my father in a private hospital room, looking marginally better than he had the day before. "Thank you all for coming," I began once everyone was seated. No small talk, no warm-up. "Yesterday, I presented a proposal for integrating Morgan Investments into EthiChain's operational structure. Today, I understand you'll be voting on that proposal." The board chair, a silver-haired man named Harrison Whitfield, cleared his throat. "Before we proceed to a vote, Ms. Morgan, the board has some counter-proposals we'd like to discuss." I raised an eyebrow. "Counter-proposals?" Yes," he continued, sliding a folder across the table. "We've reviewed your integration plan and found it has merit. However, we believe certain modifications would better serve both entities." I opened the folder, scanning the document inside. They were proposing a more traditional merger, one that would preserve the Morgan name, maintain the current leadership structure with minor adjustments, and implement EthiChain's platform as a subsidiary offering rather than a core transformation. "Legacy," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Let's talk about legacy." I stood, buttoning my blazer, a power move my father had taught me long ago, though I doubt he expected me to use it against his own board. Morgan Investments' legacy includes financing projects that damaged ecosystems across 3 continents. It includes partnerships with labor exploiters and greenwashing campaigns designed to obscure rather than address environmental impacts. It includes systematically opposing regulations that would have protected communities and resources. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. On the screen, my father's expression remained impassive, but his eyes never left mine. That legacy is precisely why your company is failing, I continued. Not because the market turned against you, but because the market evolved while you refused to change. Your counterproposal suggests you still don't understand that. Whitfield's jaw tightened. This is business, Ms. Morgan, not a moral crusade. That distinction is your first mistake, I replied. In today's market, they're inseparable. Your second mistake is thinking you have leverage in this negotiation. I pulled up a slide showing Morgan Investments' declining valuation plotted against 3 of their competitors who had embraced sustainable practices. The contrast was stark and damning. Your stock has lost 43% of its value in 6 months. Your Asian expansion is hemorrhaging money. 3 major institutional investors have divested completely. I switched to the next slide. Meanwhile, EthiChain has grown 127% year over year. Our client list has expanded from regional manufacturers to global brands. We're profitable, debt-free, and positioned for continued growth. I let that sink in before delivering the final point. I don't need this deal. Morgan Investments does. So no, I'm not accepting counter-proposals that dilute the transformation. It's my terms or nothing. The tension in the room was palpable. Several board members exchanged glances, reassessing the power dynamics at play. Theo stared at the table, fingers drumming nervously. From his hospital room, my father finally spoke. She's right. All heads turned toward the screen. He looked, tired but determined, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. Eliza's assessment is correct, he continued. We don't have leverage. We've lost it through our own stubborn adherence to outdated practices. He paused, then added, The board should accept her terms, all of them. Whitfield looked stunned. Richard, this is your company. And it's dying, my father interrupted. I'd rather see it transformed under my daughter's vision than buried under mine. The word daughter hung in the air between us, a tentative bridge across 7 years of silence. I didn't acknowledge it directly, keeping my focus on the business at hand. I need a decision today, I said. EthiChain has other expansion opportunities we're exploring. If Morgan Investments isn't interested in true transformation, we'll pursue those instead. Whitfield called for a brief recess. As the board members filed out for consultation, Theo approached me, his expression a mixture of admiration and unease. You've changed, he said quietly. I grew up, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded, glancing toward the screen, where our father was conferring with his doctor. He really does respect what you've built, you know. He talks about your company, follows your progress. That would have meant something 7 years ago, I replied. Now it's just information. When the board returned 30 minutes later, their decision was written in their posture, the slight slump of shoulders, the reluctant acceptance in their eyes. Whitfield resumed his seat at the head of the table opposite me. The board has voted to accept your integration proposal in full, he announced formally, including the rebranding and leadership restructuring. I nodded, unsurprised but satisfied. Excellent. I'll have our legal team draft the necessary documents immediately. We should aim to complete the integration within 90 days. There is one additional matter, Whitfield added. The board unanimously recommends that you personally oversee the transition as interim CEO of Morgan Investments during the integration period. That I hadn't expected. My role is at EthiChain. I have a company to run. Which is precisely why it needs to be you, my father interjected from the screen. The team needs to see that this isn't just another corporate reshuffling. They need to see the vision personified. I considered this. Taking direct control of Morgan Investments during the transition would allow me to implement changes faster, with less resistance. It would also mean working directly with the people who had once dismissed my ideas, a prospect both satisfying and emotionally complicated. I'll split my time between both companies during the transition, I conceded, with Maya taking on more operational responsibilities at EthiChain. But I want Jessica Chen as my deputy at Morgan, with full authority to implement our sustainability framework. Jessica looked up in surprise from her position against the wall, her eyes wide. Agreed, Whitfield said, though his tone suggested he was in no position to refuse. I turned to Jessica. Are you ready for this? She straightened, determination replacing surprise. Absolutely. Good, because we start today. The meeting concluded with handshakes and signed letters of intent. As the board members dispersed, I remained behind, making notes for the massive undertaking ahead. Theo lingered by the door, seemingly uncertain whether to leave or stay. On the screen, my father watched me, his expression thoughtful. Eliza, he said finally. A word in private? I looked up, considering declining but ultimately nodding. Theo took the cue and slipped out, closing the door behind him. You outmaneuvered them completely, my father said once we were alone. There was something like pride in his voice. I learned from watching you, I replied, though I'm using those tactics for different ends. He nodded, accepting this. The company will be better for it. A pause then. I should have seen it sooner, the direction things were heading, the value in your vision. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Coming from Richard Morgan, that was significant. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. What about after? He asked. After the integration is complete, will there be... He trailed off, uncharacteristically hesitant. I don't know, I answered honestly. Business is one thing, family is another. He accepted, this with a small nod. Fair enough. One step at a time. One step at a time, I echoed, gathering my materials. I'll see you at the transition announcement tomorrow. As I left the boardroom, the weight of what had just transpired settled fully on my shoulders. I had accomplished what I'd set out to do, secured the deal that would transform Morgan Investments while expanding EthiChain's reach. Yet beneath the professional satisfaction was a complex tangle of emotions I wasn't ready to unravel. Maya was waiting in my office when I returned to EthiChain headquarters. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. They accepted, she said. Not a question. I nodded, setting down my bag. Full integration on our terms. Rebranding, restructuring, the works. And they want you to lead the transition, she guessed. How did you know? She smiled wryly. Because it's the smart play? They need your credibility more than you need their infrastructure. I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the negotiation was ebbing, leaving clarity in its wake. I need you to take on more here, I said. I'll be splitting time between both companies during the transition. Already planned for it, she assured me. The team is solid. We'll manage. I looked around my office, the space I'd built from nothing, filled with reminders of the journey. The framed first dollar from our initial client, the sustainability award from last year's business forum, the photo of our team celebrating when we hit profitability. This feels like a victory, I said slowly. But not the one I expected. Maya leaned forward. How so? 7 years ago, I wanted them to see I was right, to validate my vision. I shook my head. Now that they have, it doesn't matter anymore. I built something that validated itself. That's the best kind of victory, she pointed out. The kind that comes from creation, not vindication. I smiled, grateful once again for her perspective. We have a lot of work ahead. We always do, she replied, standing. But first, we celebrate. Team dinner tonight. You need to tell everyone. What's happening before the news breaks tomorrow? The announcement of Morgan Investments' transformation sent ripples through the financial world. Business publications ran headlines like, "Ethical David absorbs traditional Goliath," and "Morgan heir redirects family legacy toward sustainability." Financial analysts debated whether this represented a turning point for the industry or merely a desperate move by a failing institution. I didn't participate in the media circus. I was too busy with the real work of integration, diving into Morgan's operations, identifying what could be salvaged and what needed to be dismantled, building a transition team that balanced institutional knowledge with fresh perspective. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.